Dear friends, this is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with the 31 days of gangster films and police films from the year 1970 to the present day, and it is my hope that this can afford us, you and me, over the course of these 31 days, my dear friends, with the opportunity to be able to speak about as many films as possible in the context of these electrifying and invigorating and supremely entertaining genres of cinema, those being the police film genre and the gangster film genre, respectively. In that spirit, today, and specifically for this video, let me now focus in on the gangster film genre and examples from that genre. Now, just now I used the phrases, say, invigorating, electrifying, entertaining, supremely entertaining, to describe these particular genres. And I think those phrases and then some can be applied and have been applied and indeed should be applied and are applied to the work that I'd like to focus on today. Let me correct that. I don't mean work, I mean works, because we are dealing with not one film, but two films. Two films from one of the great, most celebrated artists, filmmaker artists, with a filmography that is so wide-reaching and expansive and so brilliant. And the brilliance of that filmography comes out in many examples. For example, the films that I'd like to mention today. These are examples of his brilliance, and they are filled to the brim with complexity, both in terms of plot and character dynamics, because we have an ensemble, a wide sweep, a crime epic saga that is also about modernity and tradition, and also about encroaching histories, and also years of tradition and setup, and the clashes and confrontations that might emerge against the backdrop of these cultural considerations, societal considerations, and historical considerations, while at the same time being a high-octane, full-throttle, intense, and complex crime saga epic to the max. It is dealing with the context or the environment of Hong Kong and the Hong Kong triad and the Hong Kong triad culture or tradition, and also leadership and the almost Machiavellian machinations and backdrops and dealings and influences and betrayals and rivalries and factional rifts, as well as being stories about individual persons that are affected by loyalty and greed and betrayal, and indeed the concept of modernity encroaching on tradition. What will happen, and how that idea of being quote-unquote modern, how that might translate or even mutate into something that could be akin to, or indeed equal to, greed and betrayal and ambition, which takes incredible extremes as the plot progresses over the course of these, not one film, but two films. I am speaking of the films from 2005 and 2006 from the great filmmaker Johnny To Kaifeng, and they have among their incredible ensemble cast people like Simon Yam and Tony Leung Ka-fai and Louis Koo and others. And they are, and please pardon me for my poor pronunciation, but the titles are the first film from 2005, Haksewe, and the second film from 2006, Haksewe Jiwo Waikwai. And I understand they could be translated into English as Black Society, and Black Society, harmony is a virtue, or virtue is harmony, or harmony as a virtue. So we have these two films, Black Society films, However, they are also known, they are in, say, English language market releases, they are known under other titles. And the titles that I know them as are the first film being Election, and the second film being Election 2. And so I'd like to speak about those today. And let me show here the DVD that I have. This has actually 3 films total, 2 of which are these election films, Election and Election 2. Election 2 being here under another English title, which is Triad Election. Today, Election and Election 2. These are 2 films, but as I mentioned before, they can be, and they have been, and they indeed are, oftentimes regarded as one continuous crime saga epic story. And so we have the first film, and then the second film immediately as a type of direct follow-up, or maybe after the passage of some time, but we have the continuity of characters, and things that happen in the first film are continued on in the second film and developed on in the second film. So we have one epic story that one can consider, again, taking place over 2 films. And I think that's a good way of putting it. That's a good way of watching it. And indeed, if you haven't seen the election films, you're probably, I would recommend watching the first film first and then watching the second film. I think there are a lot of details of the first film that are directly relevant to the second film. So in other words, it might be best to watch it as one whole crime saga epic, which I think is indeed the case, because there are so many networks and webs of intrigue and clashes that are going on, and the seeds are being sown from the very get-go, and those sowing of seeds, plot seeds that develop into or grow into incredibly significant and oftentimes quite catastrophic or potentially catastrophic circumstances that grow and grow and grow as the time passes. This becomes part of the appeal and allure and the tension of Election and Election 2. Now, I mentioned Hong Kong, and I mentioned the Hong Kong triad. We are speaking, and the word election in, say, these English language titles that are often associated with the film in English language markets. Now, this refers to the leadership struggle that is taking place, and the concept or the organizational rule or rules by which leaders are elected to head this specific a triad criminal organization. And so we are in this period of leadership elections, and who will come out on top? Who will win the election? Who will be able to influence all of the voters in order to win out in the end? And so from here we have the emergence of rivalries and factions, backroom dealings, and also influence, and both maybe direct and also subtle, both maybe latent, and also behind the scenes, and maybe even sinister and vicious. And these clashes intensify and intensify and intensify, and they grow from different sources and different networks and different corners of this network. And they also have the implications of tradition versus the modern approach. And the tradition also is going back, not just in terms of the tradition of the setup of the organizational structure to begin with, but also a tradition in the sense of deep, almost deep traditional roots, societal roots, that also have linkages to concepts of religion and almost divine retribution, which also, and also loyalty, and the whole concept of family. And so these are tested in many ways when we have the development of plot layering from one point to another point to another point. And we add onto that all the various myriad characters that each has their own, say, agenda, or their own loyalties, or their own friendships, and also their enemies. And they seem to be set up in a certain, say, functionality at one stage of the film, but then suddenly things might happen and you slowly begin to sense a shift in what's going on in the dynamic. And maybe those characters that we might see as being, in our eyes, sympathetic, maybe through some turn of event or turn of phrase or some sudden shift of alliance in another area or another sector, that focus or that viewpoint from our perspective might change, and suddenly those that we have seen as being sympathetic or even heroic might all of a sudden seem to us villainous and very dangerous indeed. And indeed, the opposite is also very true. Maybe characters that we have seen through a certain phase of these films as being maybe somewhat villainous, somewhat unsympathetic, maybe through a certain sense of circumstance along the way, they also turn before our very eyes. And that is also to say that these types of shifts also occur elsewhere and so many places. And so everything is connected, and there are little shifts that cause huge ramifications elsewhere. You know, it's the idea of if a butterfly flaps its wings type of effect. What happens here has potentially a huge ramification there, and there, and indeed we feel that not just in the scope of, say, specific episodes of the film or the films, but we feel that also over the breadth and scope of the entire work or works writ large. And that feeling is immense. That feeling is supremely like wow. And that feeling becomes part of the entertaining dynamic of these films. I mean, this film and the lattice work of the networking of various, say, character agendas and their own goals and hopes and ambitions. And when they clash, sometimes friends become enemies, sometimes enemies become friends, sometimes neutral parties become suddenly emotionally vested, interested parties, etc. And that can shift back and forth, again, depending on where we are at a given point. But we also understand that everything has a type of connection. And in the hands of Johnny Doe and company, we understand that there are consequences to be paid. There are things that might happen, but then are not left forgotten. And that is also part of the appeal. That is also part of the epic sweep of these films, Election and Election 2. And that's what makes them, or that's one of the reasons why I think they are so compelling and so rewatchable and so utterly entertaining as they are. That's one area that we are speaking of. Another area, too, that we have to mention is the way in which we are dealing, as I tried to allude to earlier, a type of clash between years or centuries of tradition on the one hand, and then the emergence of a type of modern structure on the other hand, and what that modern structure might be represented by, or maybe how it is represented in terms of metaphor or expressed in the direct context of the plot, like, say, certain characters that are trying to compete in this election process, trying to become the leader, as it were. What that means, how they are maybe using or adapting or usurping or manipulating, or maybe even trying to destroy certain aspects of tradition in order to fuel their own, say, ambitions or greed or the like, and how that also translates as we get from one film, Election, to the second film, Election 2, how that seems to be either furthered on or embellished, or maybe it's even transformed and mutated into something related but different. And so this idea of the modern versus the tradition and how they oftentimes clash in this film, and what that means also for the years and centuries old traditions that are also on display in the context of the triad. But there is great importance and indeed, dare I say, a type of viewpoint of elegance and a type of respect that is also part of this allure or charm, or say even myth, depending on one's viewpoint, of these days of tradition, and what that means in the modern day era, how they can survive or how they can not survive. That's part of, I think, the broad thematic structure of the film. That also adds further development of the characters, and also is part of the important backdrop of what I was indicating earlier about the shifting movements and the positioning of the characters. And again, a lot of it has to do with how these characters, say the emerging generations, how they are viewing the older generations that are maybe representative of certain aspects of the triad society, but that are also maybe in the context of the emergence, the emerging, say, tension between quote unquote old and new, how these relationships then, or how that dynamic survives throughout the various personality and character clashes that the plot brings, again, against this backdrop or theme. This is also very important. And also, I think one can say, too, that one can draw a very, I think, either nuanced or maybe direct parallel or connection with this idea of the modern versus tradition, and also the focus on, say, the Hong Kong triad and its relations, both financial and also cultural, and even geopolitical in a certain manner of speaking in the context of the plot, with other areas of the world, including China. And so this story, or these stories, again set released 2005, 2006, I think can also be seen in the context of the relationship between Hong Kong and China, ever since, or even prior to 97, and then at 97, and then post 97. And so these films and the nuanced and subtle and even also direct connections and parallels and links in terms of a type of geopolitical landscape as well, that is also embedded in the backdrop of the plot, I think are also very important and key structures to pay attention to when one is watching this film, or these films, Election and Election 2. And then ultimately, these are films that combine to form this great crime saga epic. The specific plot points and character arcs are so rewarding and enchanting, and oftentimes too surprising and shocking, and sometimes they might even take turns that one is left with one's jaw, open, as it were. My goodness, that's what happened. That sort of development. I mean, it happens quite a lot, and so there are a lot of surprises, a lot of shocks, as well as a lot of human emotional drama at stake. And what's so great too about this is that there's so many characters, yet it's so easy to follow. And sometimes a character that might be seen in the background in one film, or maybe one episode of the film, might slowly emerge into a more primary role as the film goes from one film to the other film, one scenario to another scenario. And then we have, as I say, differing, emerging separate plot points, or separate episodic subplots or sub-character arcs that then either recede or emerge, or maybe they turn from hero to villain, or vice versa. And all this shifting tension, I think, adds to the great, wonderful, entertaining dynamic, because we are always watching this through a sense of fresh eyes and a fresh perspective. And everything is paced and balanced so wonderfully to give us this feel of an epic that is easy to follow, that has episodes, but is also understood that these episodes are part of this one large whole context. And when we get from the first film to the second film, and then by the end of the second film, when all is said and done, that feeling that comes over one after one has seen it, and one is left with those final moments before the film ends, and we think back to everything that we've watched ever since the first film, it becomes this huge, overwhelming experience. So overwhelming, so powerful that one becomes easily, I think, influenced to want to go back to the first film and watch it all over again. I mean, it's that exciting. It's high octane. There are sequences too that are intense. There are some action set pieces that are brilliantly staged. They are intense. They sometimes, a number of times, they can be quite violent indeed. They are all to serve and further the plot. And again, the turns and the twists and surprises are amazing. They are amazing, and they are wow. These films are wow. Wow, wow, wow. Talk about entertaining, thrilling films to the max in the context of the genre of gangsters or crime epic sagas. This film, Election and Election 2, these films, this story is a brilliant construction. And it's one of the great examples of not just modern gangster thriller films, but great examples of gangster films, period. This is one to watch if you haven't seen this already. So this story or these films, please check them out if you can. They are from Johnny Doe, and they are Election and Election 2. Okay, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.